I feel like we're officially started evolving back as a species, especially in terms of our knowledge about health, wellness, what is a myth and what is not. You see trends that I thought were put to rest, such as waist trainers, detox tea and juice cleanses, kind of make their way back into the media. And this is why today's video is going to be about 7 things that you thought to be healthy but are actually containing some risks that you were not aware of. By the way, everything in this video is science-packed as usual. My voice is a bit off in this video since I've been a bit sick recently, but not sick enough to not record a video. Enough of me rambling, let's get into the video. The first thing on the list are green smoothies. Green smoothies are the staple of any health and wellness influencer. When you drink a green smoothie, you probably get the feeling of taking great care for yourself. You're now again back on track. Although you consumed portions yesterday that were worthy of a mukbang, green smoothies were first introduced to me as a potential health risk in a toxicology lecture, and the professor there made us aware of some compounds that are found in green leafy vegetables called oxalates. Oxalates are naturally present in spinach and kale and other types of vegetables. They are not contaminants, they exist in these foods normally. Oxalates are compounds that can bind to the calcium in your body and prevent your body from absorbing it. You would not want to have less calcium than usually, since calcium is responsible for maintaining good bone health and other various important functions in your body. This is why oxalates in very high amounts can pose a health risk. They can limit the bioavailability of calcium, and since they bind to it, over time this might lead to the formation of even some small kidney stones. You would not be subjected to this type of health risk if you were just eating spinach, kale and all of the greens with your salads usually. The thing with green smoothies is that you're ingesting larger amounts than normally in the form of a drink, and if you're doing that regularly multiple times a day, you see how you are going to also be ingesting much larger amounts than under normal circumstances of these oxalates with these smoothies. The second thing on today's list is a very popular protein source because it is very appealing, and that is canned tuna. Canned tuna is very high in protein, especially compared to the calories that it contains. At the same time, it contains omega-3 fatty acids, which are great for maintaining good brain health and normal function of the immune system. Canned tuna also comes at an affordable price. Therefore, it is a great option for a lot of people that want to up their protein intake. The regular consumption of canned tuna, by regular I mean daily consumption of canned tuna, does pose its health risk, mainly due to the possible contaminants that might be present in the canned tuna. There have been studies done on different brands investigating mercury contents, zinc contents, aluminium, even BPA contents in canned tuna. And while some studies found that some brands contained excessively high amounts of mercury, other studies did not confirm that. Of course, they always investigate canned tuna from different origins. This is why you get different results. If you consume canned tuna from your grocery store, you're not familiar with the quality control processes of the brand. Therefore, it would be best to limit your risk by not eating canned tuna daily. Limiting the consumption to a few times per week is not going to be a problem, but I think it's a health risk that needs to be considered. The third thing on today's list is not something that is being talked about very often, and that is the high consumption of cinnamon. Not all cinnamon is created equal. You have Ceylon cinnamon and cassia cinnamon. Ceylon cinnamon is the so-called true cinnamon, the one that has been linked to multiple health benefits such as anti-inflammatory effects, antioxidative, also antimicrobial, anti-parasite, all of those things. It has a sweeter aroma than the cassia cinnamon and is a little bit harder to find. It would cost you also more money, but it would always be labeled since it is the more high quality cinnamon. The case with cassia cinnamon is that this is usually the cinnamon that you would see grinded for a low price at your grocery store. This is also the cinnamon I believe that they have at home, since it did not have a specification on the package as to which cinnamon this is. I assume it's cassia cinnamon. It is again with a strong aroma but not as sweet as with the Ceylon cinnamon, and it contains more of the so-called coumarin. This is the problematic compound in cinnamon. Coumarin is also present in Ceylon cinnamon but in much smaller quantities than in cassia cinnamon. It is naturally present in cinnamon, but it has been linked to the development of some liver complications and even liver cancer in animal studies. And coumarin is just as efficiently absorbed from baked goods containing cinnamon as from isolated, capsule forms of coumarin. Therefore, if you're eating large amounts of cinnamon, you might want to opt for the Ceylon cinnamon kind. I mean, if you're adding it excessively to some meals, if you just want to bake something every once in a while with cinnamon, this is not a risk. You're not going to get much coumarin from that. We're talking about daily consumption over long periods of time. The fourth thing on today's lists are low-fat products, and especially low-fat dairy products. The thing with low-fat is that it has always been marketed to decrease one's risk of cardiovascular disease, since consumption of very highly fatty foods has been linked to the development of cardiovascular disease, and more specifically atherosclerosis. Atherosclerosis is the disease where when you consume a lot of fat over large periods of time, or generally a lot of food, because carbs, if they're not used up, they are stored as fat, that leads to a lot of blood lipids, so higher amounts of cholesterol and lipids in the blood, and over time they start building plaques, and these plaques then create more inflammation, and this leads to the clogging of the arteries that you've heard about. On the topic of dairy products, I found this research paper that investigated low-fat versus normal-fat dairy products and their relation to cardiovascular risk, and this study found that low-fat dairy products did not decrease the risk of cardiovascular disease compared to normal-fat dairy products. Generally, the amount of fat that you get from your dairy does not seem to have a huge impact on the overall cardiovascular risk, especially compared with other factors in the diet. Additionally, low-fat foods, I'm not saying this applies to all low-fat foods, but it applies to a lot of them, might contain more sugar or more sodium than usual, since fat is very important for their taste. This is why manufacturers would then add other things to enhance the taste, so that it is again appealing for the consumer. On the other hand, some low-fat products also contain a lot more additives, emulsifiers to maintain the texture. When removing the fat, we're sometimes negatively impacting the texture and even the shelf life of the product. This is, for instance, the case with low-fat mayonnaise, where fat is very important for its texture. Low-fat mayonnaise would then have some emulsifiers, for instance lecithins, that would then make this mayonnaise more stable over time. And not all emulsifiers are bad. Lecithin, for instance, are natural emulsifiers. They are derived from egg yolks, but some other artificial emulsifiers have been linked to a higher incidence of some diseases. Additionally, the skimmed milk, if it's not fortified, might have lost some of its positive nutritional qualities, such as vitamin A or vitamin D content. Because these vitamins are fat soluble, if you extract the fat from them, then the fat soluble vitamins would also be extracted with the fat. The fifth thing on today's list are plant-based alternatives, and here we have three things to cover. The first thing are plant-based meats, and these meats became especially popular when the entire vegan movement was on the rise. The thing with plant-based meats is that they very often contain other things that you do not want to consume. For instance, a lot of sodium, a lot of additives to stabilize them. The plant-based meats are also highly processed because this is the only way that they can be made. They do not naturally occur in the environment. They also sometimes contain more anti-nutritional factors. Anti-nutritional factors are, for instance, phytochemicals that can bind to minerals in your body, such as calcium, iron, or zinc, and therefore limit the absorption of those minerals. Another thing about plant-based meat is that they are not always complete in their protein profile, and they do not always contain all essential amino acids. And lastly, I feel like I'm just trashing plant-based meats. They do not always have a better environmental footprint compared to the normal meats, especially compared to chicken meat. The entire red meat's environmental footprint is another topic, but in comparison to chicken meat, they're actually quite similar, of course depending on the type of plant-based meat you go for. On the topic of plant-based milks, if you're allergic to normal milk, or if you're lactose intolerant, or if you generally like the taste of plant-based milk, then go for it. But if you think they're in any way so much healthier than normal milk, you might be having a bit of the wrong idea here, since plant-based milks are not the same in their protein quality. They do not contain all essential amino acids. They are generally a lot lower in protein compared to whole milk, maybe with the exception of soy milk. Plant-based milks therefore also lack some of these vitamins such as vitamin A, vitamin D that are present in whole milk. The upside to plant milks is that they do have a smaller environmental footprint compared to whole milk, with the one exception of almond milk, where this research paper found that the water footprint of almond milk was actually higher than the one for whole milk. The third thing from this fifth thing on the list is coconut oil, and coconut oil has been gaining popularity. It's included in all different kinds of healthy recipes as a substitute for, like butter or vegetable oils. The thing with coconut oil is that it's being marketed as this very healthy option, although that's not entirely the case. We need to keep in mind that coconut oil is primarily made up of saturated fats. Saturated fats have been linked time and time again to an increased inflammation and the development of cardiovascular disease. This is the main reason why butter is not to be excessively consumed. It's also high in saturated fats. I need to mention that according to the literature, butter and coconut oil are not equal. Coconut oil does have some advantages, and it was found that the participants that consumed coconut oil had a bit of a better blood lipid profile compared to the ones consuming butter, especially when talking about their good cholesterol, the HDL-C cholesterol levels. However, if you want to compare coconut oil with olive oil, then the things are getting a bit different. Olive oil is made up primarily of monounsaturated fats and has been proven in a lot of studies to be one of the best fats that you can use for your cooking on the market. It has been linked to a decreased risk of inflammations. Therefore, if you want to substitute butter, a coconut oil would be a good alternative. But using coconut oil for everything is, in my opinion, a bit excessive, and I think it is somewhat overrated, since cooking with olive oil is actually to some extent even better. Also, do not cook with extra virgin olive oil. I have an entire video talking about oils, and this is the one right here that I talk also about vegetable oils, since that's a very controversial topic on its own. Now that I've covered this, we're moving on to thing number 6, and those are detox teas. Detox teas is not something that I thought that I would be covering in 2025, but here we are. Detox teas used to be very popular some years back, and people were promoting them to be cleansing out all of the toxins in your body. You're going to be like a new person after doing a detox tea regime. The thing with the entire concept of detox is that it has no backing, and your liver is doing a pretty good job, especially if you have a healthy liver and you don't have some type of a condition, in detoxifying your body from all of the things that it needs to be cleansed from. The only thing that detox teas do is function as laxatives and make you go to the bathroom more frequently than you would usually do. If this is your goal, you must start eating more fiber with your diet, stay hydrated, just improve your overall gut motility. Taking a laxative is not a solution to anything regarding your gut health, is only going to mess you up. I don't see why people still do this. It only leads to a temporary weight loss because you're cleaning out your gastrointestinal tract, but you're doing it in a very inefficient and partially probably also painful way. Detox teas have been linked with 2 case reports to some hospitalizations. The first one was acute liver failure in this patient that consumed yogi detox tea. This is a brand that can be found over the counter, by the way, and I don't know if this specific detox tea is still available, but this woman was consuming this tea for some time and she had to be taken into the hospital because her liver was failing. And then the scientists actually analyzed the profile of this detox tea and found that some of its components were actually linked in the scientific literature to liver failure. I cannot wrap my head around the idea that you would put a thing like this in your product, something that has been linked to liver failure, but you know, companies do their thing, I guess. The other case was a case of hyponatremia. This is quite the opposite of high blood pressure due to excessive salt consumption. You will always need some type of natrium, some type of sodium in your body, since it's responsible for a lot of functions, especially musculoskeletal functions. Therefore, very high levels of it are bad, but also very low levels of it are bad. Here, the woman did not specify exactly which tea she was drinking, therefore there could not be any conclusions made as to which compound in the tea made her get to this point, but she did report that this detox cleanse was the only thing that she had made as an adjustment to her regime, and then she was hospitalized. Moving on to the last thing on today's list, and those are workouts in a fasted state. When you work out in a fasted state, you are working out without consuming anything in the past, let's say 14 hours or so. And the whole idea here is that you're going to be using your fat storages and you're going to be burning fat in that process, because usually if you ate something prior to the workout, you would be using the carbs from that food to fuel your workout. The research here is not very conclusive. Some suggest that it might have a little bit of an impact on the fat oxidation. Others say that there is no influence on the fat oxidation. So you see, the positive sides to it are quite still mysterious and there is not a definite conclusion. However, the downsides to working out fasted are quite clear. Its main downside is the excessively high cortisol you would get from the entire process, and there are three main factors for that. The first one is, if you're working out, you do get some cortisol release from that. That's a natural process. This is not something that you can stop, and this is the normal outcome of a workout. The second thing here is, if you're working out in a fasted state, the fasted state itself does lead to a slight rise in cortisol compared to if you were in a fat state. And the third thing is, if you are working out in a fasted state, you're probably doing it in the morning, since then as you go on with your day you usually have something, and in the morning you generally have higher levels of cortisol, since when you wake up, this is the natural response to the body to wake you up, higher cortisol. This is again a normal process that you cannot do anything about, but combining these three things together, you see how that can have a negative influence on your cortisol levels, and you do not want to be doing this to your body. Additionally, if you're working out and under fueling yourself or not fueling yourself, you might not have sufficient energy to perform the workout accordingly, and you might increase your risk of injury. So eating something prior to the workout has a lot more benefits, and the minimal increase in fat burning you would get from a fasted workout is not really worth it, considering all of the negative sides. I hope that you learned something from today's video. Let me know down in the comments below if there is a thing that you would like me to do a video on next time. Also, if you enjoyed the content, do not forget to like and to subscribe to the channel. Thank you again very much for watching today's video, and I will be seeing you in the next one.